You've probably heard the line, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And yes, he did, but what many history books skip over is that Christopher Columbus didn't actually discover America. In fact, he was way off course. Let's take a fun and factual look at what really happened. The spice chase. That started it all back in the late 1400s, Europe had a big craving. Spices. Pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were like gold. They weren't just for flavor, but also used as medicine and even as a sign of wealth. The best place to get them? India and the East Indies. But there was a problem. The usual land routes passed through the Middle East, and after the Ottomans captured Constantinople in 1453, they controlled those paths, making travel expensive and risky. Enter Columbus. Born in Genoa, Italy around 1451, he came up with a bold idea. Instead of going east to India, why not sail west across the Atlantic Ocean? He believed the Earth was much smaller than it actually is and thought the journey would be quicker. Most experts at the time disagreed, but Columbus was confident. He eventually convinced Spain's King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella to sponsor his trip. They gave him 3 ships, the Niña, Pinta, and Santa Maria. With about 90 men, Columbus set sail in August 1492, looking for spices and riches. The journey and the big mistake: Columbus and his crew spent weeks at sea, no GPS, no fresh food, just rough waves and hope. Then on October 12, 1492, they spotted land. Columbus believed he had reached Asia, but in reality he was in the Caribbean, probably what we now call the Bahamas. He named the island San Salvador. He explored other nearby islands like Cuba and Hispaniola, modern Haiti and the Dominican Republic, still thinking he was near Asia. He even called the local Taino people Indios, or Indians, a name that stuck for centuries, even though he was thousands of miles away from India. And here's something many people don't know: Columbus never stepped foot on mainland North America. So, who did discover America? Let's get one thing straight. Columbus didn't discover an empty land. The Americas were already home to millions of indigenous people who had lived there for over 15,000 years. In the Caribbean, the Taino people had their own communities, farming, fishing, and even playing a ball game called bate. They had leaders, religious ceremonies, and strong trade systems. And even before Columbus, there was Leif Erikson, a Viking explorer from Iceland. Around the year 1000 CE, almost 500 years earlier, he sailed from Greenland and landed in what's likely now Newfoundland, Canada. He named the place Vinland, and evidence at a site called L'Anse aux Meadows shows that Vikings were there long before Columbus arrived in the Caribbean. What about Amerigo Vespucci? If Columbus didn't realize he'd found new lands, someone else did, Amerigo Vespucci. Born in Florence in 1454, Amerigo explored parts of South America in the late 1490s. Unlike Columbus, he understood that these lands weren't part of Asia. They were an entirely new continent. He wrote about his findings, and in 1507, a German mapmaker named Martin Waldseemüller used Amerigo's first name, America, to label the newly mapped continents. That's why we call them North and South America today. The dark side of discovery. While Columbus's journey opened the door for future exploration, it also led to tragic consequences. His arrival marked the start of the Columbian Exchange, where plants, animals, and diseases were exchanged between the old and new worlds. But for the indigenous people, especially the Taino, this brought suffering. Many were enslaved or killed, and new diseases wiped out entire communities. The population of Hispaniola dropped from possibly 250,000 to just a few hundred within decades. Columbus also began sending enslaved Africans to the Americas, one of the early steps toward the transatlantic slave trade. Columbus's settlements didn't go well either. His leadership was so harsh that his own men rebelled, and in 1500 Spain arrested him for mismanaging the colonies. So what's the real story? Columbus didn't discover a new world, he accidentally found lands already full of life, culture, and history. Vikings like Leif Erikson had arrived earlier, and indigenous peoples had been there for thousands of years. The continent was named after Amerigo Vespucci, the man who realized what Columbus never did, that this was a new part of the world. Final thoughts. Next time someone says, Columbus discovered America, you can kindly say, actually, he stumbled onto islands already filled with people and never even made it to North America. History is full of surprises, and sometimes it's the wrong turns that lead to the biggest changes.